Elias lived alone in a small cabin deep in the mountains. The cabin was old but sturdy, built from thick logs he had gathered himself many years ago. Moss covered the roof and smoke from the stone fireplace curled into the cold morning air. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly, full of towering trees and tangled underbrush. The wind whispered through the branches and the sound of a nearby stream filled the quiet. He had chosen this life long ago, seeking peace and isolation, and for decades he had found it. His days followed a simple rhythm. In the mornings he chopped firewood and stacked it neatly by the door. Then he tended to a small garden behind the cabin. The vegetables were few but enough to keep him fed. He watered them carefully, pulled weeds, and sometimes talked to them quietly as if speaking to friends. When the garden work was done, he walked down to the stream to fish. He had learned the habits of the river, where the fish liked to hide and when they would bite. He always fished enough for a meal, but never more. Elias had learned to live with silence. There were no neighbors to greet, no townsfolk to gossip with, no laughter of children in the streets. The forest was his companion, the wind his voice, the birds his music. And yet, despite the beauty around him, he carried a quiet emptiness. The kind of emptiness that came not from hunger or cold, but from years of being alone. Sometimes, when he sat by the fire at night, he would catch himself staring at the dark corners of the cabin, wishing for something he could not name. Long ago, Elias had loved someone deeply. A woman with a gentle smile and bright eyes had once shared his days. Her laughter had filled his heart and her hand had been warm in his. But tragedy had taken her away too soon. Illness had claimed her, leaving him hollow and broken. After her death, he had fled the world, believing he could never bear to feel that kind of pain again. And so he built his life in the mountains, choosing solitude over the risk of loss. Years turned into decades, and Elias became a shadow in the memories of those in the nearby villages. Some people spoke of him as a ghost. The old hermit, they would whisper. He hasn't been seen in years. Some say he talks to the trees, some say he's cursed. But Elias cared little for what people thought. Their world had become distant, like a story told from another lifetime. On one gray morning, Elias was chopping firewood near the edge of the forest when he felt something unusual. A rustling in the underbrush caught his attention. His axe paused mid-swing. He squinted through the foggy light filtering between the trees. For a moment, there was nothing but the wind moving the leaves. Then he saw her. A young woman, dirty and tired, stumbled into the clearing. She was clutching her backpack and had tears streaking down her cheeks. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she looked as if she had been running for hours. Elias froze. He had not seen a stranger in years, not someone who belonged to the world he had left behind. His first instinct was caution. Who was she? Was she dangerous? Could she be trusted? The forest had taught him to be careful, to observe before acting. The woman noticed him too and stumbled back a few steps. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. I'm lost. I can't find my way back." Her words were soft but urgent, carrying the weight of exhaustion. Elias studied her closely. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, and looked small and fragile compared to the towering trees around her. Her clothes were torn in places and her shoes were caked in mud. Elias hesitated, unsure how to respond. Part of him wanted to turn away, to continue his life untouched by the world. Another part, deeper and quieter, felt a stirring he had not felt in decades. Compassion, responsibility, perhaps even curiosity. Slowly he lowered his axe. "You can come to my cabin," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He had not spoken to anyone in a long time, and the sound of his own words made him feel strange. The woman's eyes brightened slightly and she nodded gratefully. She stumbled toward him, and he guided her gently through the trees, keeping a careful distance. The cabin emerged through the mist, small and weathered but welcoming. Smoke still curled from the chimney and the scent of pine and earth filled the air. Elias opened the door and gestured inside. "Sit by the fire," he said. "You look cold." She obeyed immediately, sinking onto a worn chair near the hearth. Elias placed a blanket around her shoulders. She shivered, and he could see the relief in her eyes. He busied himself with preparing some food. There was little to eat, but he had some bread, dried meat, and a few vegetables from his garden. He lit a small fire in the stove, and the warmth slowly filled the cabin. The woman ate quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she held the bread. Elias watched her, unsure if he should speak or remain silent. After years of solitude, conversation felt awkward, but he found himself asking, "What is your name?" "Clara," she said softly. The simplicity of the name sounded strange yet comforting in the quiet cabin. Elias nodded. "How did you get lost?" he asked. She hesitated, then explained that she had been hiking with friends but had wandered off the trail. She became disoriented and could not find her way back. She had been walking for hours before she saw smoke from the cabin and decided to follow it, hoping someone was there. Elias listened quietly. Her voice was steady now, and he found himself drawn to the tone, the life in it. There was a resilience in her that he admired. After she finished speaking, silence returned. It was not uncomfortable but heavy, filled with the weight of two very different lives meeting unexpectedly. Over the next few days, Elias observed Clara. She was careful not to intrude, but she also offered help when she could. She gathered herbs from the forest and showed him a few ways to use them for meals. She helped water the garden and clean the cabin, her presence slowly weaving itself into the fabric of his life. For Elias, every small act of kindness felt new and strange. He realized how long it had been since he had shared his space with anyone. Despite the initial tension, he began to appreciate her company. They rarely spoke for long, but their interactions carried a quiet understanding. A smile here, a nod there, a shared glance over a meal. These small gestures began to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart. Elias found himself anticipating her presence, noticing when she was near, and feeling a flicker of warmth he had long thought impossible. At night, he would sit by the fire, watching the shadows dance across the cabin walls. He would catch himself thinking about her, wondering about her life outside the forest, imagining her laughter and her stories. These thoughts were foreign to him, yet comforting. He realized that the solitude he had cherished for so long had also kept him from feeling alive in a way he had almost forgotten. One evening, as the wind howled outside and rain tapped against the roof, Clara asked him about his past. Elias was hesitant, the question stirring memories he had long buried. He shook his head. "It's a long story," he said. "A story of mistakes, loss, and regrets. Perhaps not for now." Clara nodded, understanding that some things could not be rushed, but her gentle curiosity, her patience, and the quiet respect she showed him slowly began to break down the barriers he had built over decades. Time moved differently in the forest. Days blended into nights and nights into days. Elias found himself laughing quietly at her jokes, explaining how to fish in the stream, or sharing small anecdotes from his life.
He noticed the way the sunlight fell on her hair as she worked in the garden,
the way she tilted her head when listening, and the way her presence seemed to fill the empty corners of the cabin. Elias had been alone for decades, yet for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of connection. Not the loud, chaotic connection of the world outside, but a quiet, steady bond that grew slowly with shared space, shared tasks, and shared moments of understanding. It was fragile, but it was real, and it reminded him of the life he had once lived and the love he had lost. And so, life in the cabin began to change. Elias still chopped wood, tended the garden, and fished by the stream. Yet now there was laughter. There were conversations. There was warmth beyond the fire. There was the presence of another human being who mattered, who cared, and who slowly began to make him feel alive again. The forest remained the same. Tall trees, winding streams, and endless silence. But inside the small cabin, a small spark had been lit. And for Elias, that spark was both frightening and exhilarating. For the first time in decades, he wondered what it might mean to open his heart again. He did not yet know how far this connection would go, or what it would demand from him. But as he watched Clara sit by the fire, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, he felt something he had thought lost forever: hope. The days passed slowly in the mountains, yet each one felt fuller than Elias had expected. Clara had grown stronger since her arrival. Her initial fear had softened into cautious curiosity, and her tired eyes now shone with quiet determination. Elias noticed how she moved through the cabin and the garden with purpose, how she listened carefully when he spoke, and how she always tried to be helpful without overstepping. At first, Elias had been cautious, keeping her at a distance. He had spent so many years alone that even the sound of another person's presence made him uneasy. But Clara's kindness and patience were gentle forces, not intrusive. She waited while he chopped firewood, watched quietly while he repaired the fence, and sat nearby while he prepared my eels. Her presence was steady like the stream flowing past his cabin, and slowly he began to trust her. One morning, Elias decided to show her the vegetable garden. The soil was soft from recent rain, and tiny green shoots had begun to emerge from the earth. "These are beans," he said, pointing to a row near the edge. "They will grow tall and strong if you tend them carefully." Clara knelt down and touched the soil lightly, letting her fingers brush the tender plants. "They're beautiful," she said softly. Elias nodded, noticing how she seemed to understand the care that went into nurturing them. Over the next few days, she helped him with the garden. She learned quickly which plants needed more water, which weeds to pull, and how to tell if the soil was too dry or too wet. Elias watched her work with admiration. It was not just her skill, but her patience, the way she approached tasks with calm focus that impressed him. He found himself talking more, explaining why he planted certain vegetables in specific spots, telling her stories about how he had learned to live off the land. Clara listened attentively, asking questions and sometimes laughing at his jokes. Evenings were the quietest part of the day. After supper, Elias would sit by the fire while Clara cleaned the dishes or organized the small shelves in the cabin. Sometimes she would sit across from him, her hands busy with a task, and they would talk in low voices. They spoke about simple things: how the sun looked through the trees in the morning, which birds sang at dawn, the best way to fish in the stream. These conversations were not grand or important, yet they created a sense of connection that Elias had not felt in decades. One evening, a storm rolled in from the mountains. Rain pelted the roof and wind rattled the windows. Clara had been reading by the fire when the first drops fell, and Elias had been sharpening his tools. The storm made everything feel smaller, more intimate. He gestured for her to move closer to the fireplace. "The storm will pass," he said. "We are safe here." Clara nodded, pulling her knees close and wrapping her arms around them. The fire crackled, filling the room with warmth. Elias found himself telling her small details of his life, things he had never shared with anyone. "I came here after losing someone," he said quietly, his voice low against the storm. Clara did not press him for more, but she listened with her full attention. Her silence was comforting, a reminder that he did not have to explain everything at once. The storm lasted through the night. Elias and Clara slept in the same cabin but on opposite sides, separated by a small table. Yet in the darkness he felt her presence close like a steady heartbeat. He had not realized how much he missed the simple comfort of another human being nearby. Her breathing, the soft rustle of her movements, even the faint scent of her hair as she shifted in sleep, it all reminded him that life was not meant to be endured alone. When morning came, the storm had passed. The forest glistened with rain and birds sang as if celebrating the new day. Elias and Clara stepped outside together. She picked up fallen leaves and handed him a few, laughing when the wetness made them slippery. He smiled at her, a genuine smile that had not appeared on his face for many years. For the first time in a long while, he felt light inside, as if a weight he had carried for decades was lifting. Clara began to explore the surrounding forest during the day, collecting herbs and wild vegetables. Elias sometimes followed, sometimes stayed behind in the cabin. They had a silent understanding. She could wander, but she would not go too far. During these walks, Elias taught her how to identify edible plants, which berries were safe to eat, and how to listen to the forest for signs of animals or changing weather. Clara soaked up every word, her eyes wide with curiosity. One afternoon, they came across an old tree with a hollow trunk. Clara peered inside and laughed when she found a small family of squirrels. Elias chuckled too, watching her fascination. "Nature has its own surprises," he said. She nodded, her smile bright against the green forest. "I've never seen anything like this," she said. "Everything here feels alive in a way I never noticed before." Elias felt a pang of sadness and longing. She reminded him of what he had lost, but also of what he could still feel. Inside the cabin, they began to share more of their lives. Clara told him about her family, about friends she had left behind, and about the small dreams she carried. Elias listened, sometimes offering advice, sometimes just nodding. He had forgotten how important it was to be heard, to share one's thoughts without fear of judgment. With Clara, he found that freedom. One day, while working in the garden, Clara accidentally cut her finger on a small knife. Blood seeped slowly and she winced. Elias immediately grabbed a cloth and pressed it to the wound. "Careful," he said, concern etched on his face. He cleaned the cut with warm water, applied an herbal ointment, and bandaged it. She watched him quietly, touched by his careful hands. "You always take care of everything," she said softly. Elias looked away, feeling a warmth in his chest that he did not fully understand. Evenings continued to be the most reflective time. After supper, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading aloud from old books Elias had collected, sometimes simply talking. There were no distractions, no noise from the outside world, only the crackle of the fire, the occasional hoot of an owl, and the quiet murmur of conversation. These moments were small, but they built a deep sense of trust. Elias realized that Clara was not just a guest. She was becoming a part of his life, and he was beginning to care for her in ways he had not expected. One particularly cold evening, Clara asked him about his days before he came to the mountains. Elias hesitated, then shared fragments of his past. He spoke of his work in a distant town, the friends he had lost, and the woman he had loved and lost. He did not go into every detail, but enough to show her the man he had once been. Clara listened without interruption, her eyes gentle and understanding. "You have lived so much," she said, "and yet you are still here, still trying." Elias nodded, feeling a quiet gratitude for her words. Their bond deepened over small acts of care. Clara learned to prepare simple meals using the vegetables from the garden and the fish from the stream. Elias showed her how to chop wood safely and how to light a fire when the kindling was damp. They worked side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking, but always with a shared purpose. Each day Elias noticed her more, the way she moved, the way she laughed, the way her eyes sparkled with curiosity. He felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a feeling he had not allowed himself to experience for decades. One afternoon, Clara found an old journal tucked behind a shelf. She opened it carefully and discovered pages filled with Elias's writing from years ago. The entries were honest and raw, filled with reflections on life, loss, and solitude. She read quietly, realizing the depth of his experiences. When she looked up, Elias was watching her. She returned the journal to him gently. "You've carried so much," she said softly. Elias nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He had hidden these thoughts for so long, and now someone had seen them without judgment. As the days turned into weeks, Elias began to notice a change in himself. He laughed more, spoke more, and even looked forward to Clara's company. He no longer feared her presence. Instead, he welcomed it. The cabin, once a sanctuary of solitude, now felt warm and alive. The silence he had cherished for so long was replaced with shared moments of connection, moments that made him feel human again. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, they sat together outside the cabin. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the forest was bathed in golden light. Clara leaned back against a log, her eyes closed, breathing in the fresh air. Elias watched her, a sense of peace settling over him. For the first time in decades, he felt that he belonged, not just in the forest, but in a life that included another person. He realized that trust was not just about safety or caution. It was about allowing someone to enter the space of your life, to share your world, and to accept the possibility of connection. And in Clara, he had found someone who made that possible. She had not demanded it. She had earned it slowly, patiently, with kindness and understanding. By the end of the week, Elias knew that life in the mountains would never be the same. The forest remained the same, quiet, beautiful, and untouched, but the cabin now held laughter, conversation, and warmth. Clara had become a part of his daily life, a companion in ways he had not thought possible. And though he had once believed that his heart could never feel again, he began to see that it could, that it had the capacity for connection and care that he had long denied himself. The mountain air was crisp, the stream flowed gently, and the trees swayed with the wind. Elias looked around at the life he had built, now shared with Clara, and felt a quiet sense of gratitude. He had chosen solitude once, but now he understood the value of presence, of shared moments, and of trust. The world outside might never know of the small cabin in the forest or the bond that had formed there, but inside, two lives were slowly weaving together in a way that felt both fragile and strong, delicate and real. And so life moved forward in the mountains. Days were filled with work, laughter, and shared quiet. Nights were spent by the fire reflecting on the past and imagining the future, and in the midst of it all, Elias felt something he had lost forever, a connection that reminded him that life, even after years of solitude, could still hold warmth, care, and the gentle beginnings of trust. One morning, while breaking the crusted soil to plant new seeds, Elias noticed Clara watching him quietly. She did not speak at first, simply observing his hands work, the way he moved with care and precision. She had grown used to his silence, and he had grown used to her presence. But that morning, something in her gaze made him pause. "Is something on your mind?" he asked, brushing soil from his palms. Clara hesitated. She was thoughtful, careful with words. "I was wondering," she said slowly, "how you ended up here. How did you come to live in the mountains like this?" Elias looked away, focusing on the small green shoots of a plant he was about to water. He did not answer immediately. The question was heavy, carrying decades of memory and pain. He had kept his past locked away, even from himself in some ways. But Clara's calm patience encouraged him to speak. He sat on a nearby rock, letting the earth hold him. "I lived a different life once," he began, his voice low. "I had people around me, friends, a home, someone I loved deeply. I thought that life would last forever, but it ended too soon. I lost her, and I could not bear the world after that. I came here to be alone, to escape the pain." Clara listened, her eyes steady, her expression gentle. She did not interrupt, and Elias found that in itself was comforting. She did not judge. She did not question. She simply allowed him to speak. Elias spoke of her for the first time in years. He spoke of her laughter, the way it could fill a room, the warmth in her hand, the way she had made even ordinary days feel extraordinary. His voice trembled at times, betraying the depth of his grief. Clara stayed silent, letting the words flow without interference. When he paused, she said softly, "She must have been very special." Elias nodded, feeling the lump in his throat. "She was everything," he admitted. "And when she was gone, I thought I would never feel again." For days after that conversation, Elias thought about what he had said. The act of speaking aloud, of sharing a part of himself he had kept hidden for decades, left him feeling both lighter and more vulnerable. Clara's presence was a steady reassurance. She never pressed him to continue. She merely offered companionship. The trust between them deepened, not through grand gestures but through shared space and silent understanding. One afternoon, Elias took Clara to a part of the forest he rarely visited. The trees here were older, the undergrowth thicker. He led her to a small clearing with a rock that overlooked the valley below. Sunlight poured into the space, and the air was fragrant with pine and wildflowers. "I come here sometimes," he said, "to think, to remember, to be alone." Clara sat beside him, her legs folded beneath her, and looked out at the view. "It's beautiful," she said. "I can see why you come here." Elias nodded, feeling the truth of her words. For decades, this place had been his refuge, and now it was a place he could share. Clara began to ask more questions about the forest and the cabin. She wanted to understand his life, the routines he had built, and the skills he had developed. Elias explained how he hunted small game, fished in the stream, and preserved food for the winter. He showed her the old traps he had set and the techniques he used to start a fire without matches. Clara was a quick learner, and he noticed her determination and curiosity. It was not the eagerness of a visitor, it was the eagerness of someone who wanted to be part of his life. Their days were filled with work, but also with quiet moments. They would sit by the stream washing clothes or simply watching the water flow over the rocks. Sometimes they spoke about trivial things, the color of the sky, the sound of birds, the smell of fresh earth. Other times they sat in silence, sharing the comfort of being near another person without the need for words. Elias began to realize how much he had missed these small connections, how hollow life had been without them. One evening, Clara asked him about the journal she had discovered weeks ago. "Why did you write all of this?" she asked, holding one gently. Elias took a deep breath, considering his answer. "I suppose I wrote to remember," he said. "To understand myself. To hold on to the things I could not keep in real life." Clara nodded. "And now you don't need to hide it," she said. "You can share it with me." Elias felt a strange warmth, a mixture of relief and uncertainty. He had never shared his inner thoughts so openly with anyone, and yet he felt a trust in Clara that he could not explain. As spring deepened, the forest came alive with new growth. Flowers bloomed along the edges of the cabin, and the birds sang louder in the mornings. Elias found himself noticing things he had overlooked for decades: the way sunlight filtered through the leaves, the sound of a deer moving through the underbrush, the delicate pattern of a spider's web. Clara pointed out these details with delight, and he felt a renewed appreciation for the world around him. Her presence brought him into the moment in a way he had long forgotten. One day, while gathering herbs in a distant part of the forest, Clara tripped on a root and fell. Elias rushed to her side, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, concern etched on his face. She laughed softly, brushing dirt from her hands. "Just a little scare," she said. He helped her up, steadying her as they walked back toward the cabin. In that moment, Elias realized how much he cared for her safety, how much her well-being mattered to him. It was a feeling that both frightened and exhilarated him, a reminder that he was no longer alone. Nights continued to be a time of reflection. After supper, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading aloud from one of Elias's old books, sometimes sharing stories from their lives. Clara spoke of her childhood, her dreams, and the people she had loved. Elias listened, occasionally, sharing his own experiences, though carefully and sparingly. He had learned to protect his heart, but he also knew that sharing it slowly with someone who cared was part of living again. One evening, as the wind whispered through the trees outside, Elias spoke of the woman he had lost. He described her smile, her kindness, and the way she had made life feel full. Clara listened without interruption, her eyes steady and understanding. When he finished, she reached out and placed a hand over his. It was a small gesture, but it carried more meaning than words could express. Elias felt a warmth he had not felt in decades, a connection that reminded him he was capable of feeling again. The trust between them grew not only through words but through shared actions. Clara learned to cook simple meals with the vegetables from the garden and fish from the stream. Elias showed her how to start a fire with damp wood and how to identify safe plants in the forest. They worked together, sometimes in silence, sometimes laughing quietly. Each day, Elias noticed her more, the way she smiled when she discovered something new, the way she listened intently, the way her presence made the cabin feel alive. One afternoon, Clara found a small injured bird near the stream. She picked it up gently, examining its wing. Elias watched her, impressed by her care and patience. "We can help it," he said. Together, they built a small shelter for the bird and fed it. Over the next few days, they watched it regain strength, and when it finally flew away, Clara clapped her hands softly in delight. Elias smiled, realizing that these small acts of care were teaching him to open his heart again. The days in the mountains were quiet, but in that quiet, something significant was happening. Elias felt emotions he had long suppressed: hope, compassion, and even the tentative beginnings of affection. He did not yet understand the depth of what he felt, but he knew that Clara's presence had changed him. He looked forward to her company, noticed her absence when she wandered in the forest, and felt a strange sense of anticipation when she smiled at him. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sun dip below the horizon, Clara turned to him. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" she asked softly. Elias shook his head. "No," he said. "This is my home. But now, it feels like your home too." Clara smiled, a quiet, genuine smile. "I like it here," she said. "It feels safe and peaceful. With you." Elias felt a lump in his throat. The words were simple, but they carried weight. She was acknowledging their shared life, the bond that had grown between them, and he realized how much he valued her presence. As night fell, they returned to the cabin. The fire burned brightly, casting warm light on the walls. Elias sat in his usual chair, and Clara sat nearby, her hands folded in her lap. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken, understanding of shared days, shared work, and shared moments of quiet reflection. Elias felt a sense of gratitude he had not known in decades. He had chosen solitude once, but now he understood the richness of life with someone by his side. The forest outside remained unchanged, as it had for centuries, but inside the cabin, life had shifted. Elias was no longer the solitary hermit he had been. He had allowed another person into his world, and in doing so, had discovered that trust, care, and connection could exist even after years of isolation. Clara had brought light into his life, and he knew that the days ahead would continue to bring new experiences, new challenges, and new joys. As they settled for the night, Elias reflected on the journey they had begun together. He did not yet know where it would lead, but he understood that the bond they were forming was real and meaningful. In the quiet of the mountains, amidst the trees, the stream, and the wind, two lives had intersected, and in that intersection, something fragile and beautiful was taking shape. A trust that would grow, a companionship that would deepen, and the slow, steady awakening of a heart that had long been dormant. The days in the mountains had grown longer and warmer, and the forest was alive with the songs of birds and the rustle of new leaves. Elias and Clara had settled into a routine, but it was more than mere habit now. Their days were marked by shared laughter, quiet companionship, and small acts of care that deepened the bond between them. Every task, from tending the garden to gathering water from the stream, had become a shared experience, creating a rhythm that neither of them had expected, but both had come to cherish. One late afternoon, a storm rolled in suddenly. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and the wind picked up, making the trees bend and groan. The first drops of rain began to fall, followed by heavier showers. Clara had been collecting herbs near the edge of the forest, and Elias called out to her, his voice firm yet calm. "Come inside. The storm is coming fast." She hurried back, her coat damp and her hair plastered to her face. Elias guided her to the cabin, keeping a steady hand on her shoulder to prevent her from slipping on the muddy ground. Inside, the cabin was warm from the fire Elias had lit earlier. The wind rattled the windows, and the rain pelted the roof, but the interior felt safe and protected. Clara sat close to the fireplace, wrapping herself in a blanket. Elias moved around, checking that everything was secure, closing windows and reinforcing the door. There was a tension in the air, a strange mix of excitement and unease. For the first time, Clara truly saw the depth of Elias's care, the way he thought ahead, the way he acted decisively to ensure safety. It was a different side of him, strong and steady, yet not unapproachable. As the storm raged outside, the firelight flickered across their faces. Clara watched him quietly, noticing the lines etched by years of solitude, the gray in his hair, and the gentle way he moved. Elias noticed her gaze and felt a sudden awareness of her closeness. He had spent so long avoiding intimacy, avoiding the vulnerability that came with closeness, that her presence now stirred feelings he could barely name. His chest felt tight, his hands slightly trembling, and for the first time in decades he felt a raw awareness of another person in his space. Clara broke the silence softly. "Do you ever feel lonely, Elias?" Her voice was gentle, not probing, simply curious. He paused, staring into the flames, feeling the weight of the question. "I did," he admitted, "for many years. But now, it is different. You make the silence bearable. You make it alive." His words were halting, unfamiliar, because he had not allowed himself to speak like this for so long. Clara smiled, a quiet warmth that lit the cabin more than the fire ever could. The storm continued through the night, and they remained inside. For the first time, Elias allowed Clara to sit closer than usual. She did not move away, and he did not step back. Their hands brushed lightly as they passed objects across the table, and each touch sent a small, undeniable spark through him. He had not felt human contact like this in decades, and the sensation was both frightening and thrilling. His heart raced, and yet there was a sense of comfort he could not ignore. At one point, Clara reached for a cup of tea, and their fingers lingered together longer than necessary. Elias felt a trembling he could not suppress. He had avoided such moments, convinced that solitude was safer than risk. But now, the warmth of her hand against his own was grounding, reassuring, and stirring. He caught himself staring, realizing how much he longed for connection, for the closeness that had seemed impossible after years of isolation. The storm began to wane, and the rain slowed to a gentle patter. Clara and Elias sat in companionable silence, listening to the wind in the trees and the water dripping from the eaves. The quiet was different now, not empty, not hollow, but filled with shared presence. Elias felt an unusual mixture of relief and vulnerability. He had not anticipated that human connection could feel so intense, so immediate, and yet so comforting. As night deepened, Clara spoke softly, almost hesitantly. "Elias, do you ever think about what it would be like to share your life with someone? Not just for a moment, but for real?" Elias's chest tightened. The question was simple, yet it carried the weight of years, decades even. He had spent so long avoiding it, fearing loss, fearing pain, fearing the stirring of a heart that could still feel. Yet the thought of sharing life with her, of allowing her into his world, brought an unfamiliar warmth that made him tremble. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers for understanding. I never thought it would be possible," he said quietly. "I believed my heart had grown too old, too tired. But now, sitting here with you, I can feel it again. The possibility of connection." Clara's smile was gentle, reassuring, filled with patience and understanding. She reached out, resting her hand on his arm, a gesture of trust, of invitation, of care. Elias felt a rush of emotion, fear, anticipation, hope, all mingling in a way that left him both trembling and grounded. The night grew deeper, and they moved closer to the fire. The flickering light illuminated the cabin in warm hues, and the storm outside had softened to a gentle drizzle. Elias found himself speaking more openly, telling Clara about small details of his past, his fears, his regrets. Clara listened intently, never judging, never interrupting. Her presence was steady, a constant reassurance that allowed him to open up without fear. As the hours passed, Elias realized that he had not felt this alive in decades. The trembling he experienced was not just physical but emotional, a recognition that his heart was waking from a long slumber. He had avoided intimacy for so long, but Clara's patience, kindness, and understanding had made it possible for him to feel again. The fear of vulnerability was still there, but it was tempered by the warmth of trust and the quiet joy of shared presence. At one point, Clara leaned slightly closer, resting her head against his shoulder for a brief moment. Elias felt the weight of her trust, the softness of her movement, and the undeniable closeness that had been missing from his life for so long. He did not move away. Instead, he allowed himself to feel the connection fully, to accept the comfort, the reassurance, and the tentative stirrings of affection. It was a moment of awakening, a recognition that life could still hold intimacy, care, and emotional warmth, even after decades of solitude. They spoke little after that. Words were not necessary. The shared presence, the gentle touch, the awareness of one another was enough. Elias felt a tremor of vulnerability mixed with gratitude, realizing that he was no longer alone in the world. Clara had become a companion, a confidant, and a bridge back to life he had long abandoned. The storm had passed entirely by morning. The air was fresh and crisp, filled with the scent of wet earth and pine. The forest seemed to breathe with new life, and the cabin, once a place of solitary refuge, now felt like a home shared in trust and connection. Elias and Clara moved about their morning tasks with ease, their interactions smooth, their shared glances filled with unspoken understanding. As the day wore on, Elias reflected on the previous night. The trembling he had felt was not weakness. It was a reminder that the heart, no matter how long it had been closed, could still feel, could still respond, and could still embrace connection. He realized that solitude had protected him from pain, but it had also kept him from experiencing the richness of life, the depth of companionship, and the simple joy of shared moments. Clara had brought all of that back into his world. By evening, they found themselves sitting once more by the fire. The cabin was quiet except for the crackling of the flames. Elias felt a deep sense of peace, tempered by the lingering tremor of emotional awareness. He understood that the bond they shared was fragile, delicate, and yet profoundly real. It was built not on grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but on small acts of care, trust, patience, and understanding. Clara reached out again, resting her hand lightly on his. This time, Elias did not tremble as sharply. Instead, he allowed the warmth of her hand to ground him, to remind him that connection was not only possible but necessary. The fear of vulnerability remained, but it was tempered by the quiet certainty that he was not alone, and that someone cared for him deeply. As night fell, Elias and Clara settled into a comfortable silence. The firelight danced across their faces, illuminating the shared trust, the budding connection, and the tentative stirrings of affection that had begun to grow. Elias knew that the journey ahead would not be without challenges, that vulnerability could bring both joy and pain. Yet he also knew that he could no longer deny the human need for companionship, care, and intimacy. In the quiet of the cabin, amidst the remnants of the storm, Elias experienced a moment of awakening. The trembling he had felt was a reminder of life's unpredictability, the rawness of human emotion, and the power of trust and connection. Clara's presence had brought him back to life, not through force or insistence, but through patience, understanding, and quiet care. The forest outside remained serene, timeless, and unchanging, but within the cabin, something profound had shifted. Elias was no longer merely surviving in solitude. He was living, feeling, and opening his heart in ways he had thought impossible. Clara had become more than a visitor. She was a companion, a presence that had reignited his capacity for trust, warmth, and human connection. And so, in the flickering firelight, amidst the quiet comfort of shared presence, Elias realized that the trembling he felt was not a weakness but a sign of life, the awakening of a heart long closed, now learning to beat again in the presence of someone who cared. It was a fragile beginning, delicate and uncertain, yet full of promise, warmth, and the quiet joy of rediscovering connection. Spring had fully arrived in the mountains. The air was warmer, the sun lingered longer in the sky, and the forest was alive with movement. Birds sang loudly from the treetops, squirrels dashed along the branches, and flowers of every color dotted the forest floor. The small cabin, once silent and solitary, now felt alive with presence, laughter, and care. Elias and Clara had settled into a life together, one that was simple but rich, filled with shared work, quiet moments, and the steady, gentle growth of connection. Mornings began early. Elias would chop firewood while Clara tended the garden, and sometimes they would meet at the stream to gather water. Each day was marked by small routines, but it was no longer routine in the lonely sense. It was a rhythm of shared life, of trust, and of companionship. Their interactions were natural and effortless. A glance, a smile, a quiet word, all conveyed care and understanding. Elias noticed details he had long ignored. The way Clara's hair caught the sunlight, the gentle expression she wore while working, the soft sound of her laughter. One morning, as Elias prepared breakfast over the stove, Clara entered the cabin carrying freshly picked herbs. She moved quietly, careful not to disturb the peace of the morning, yet her presence filled the space. Elias looked up and smiled. "You always bring life with you," he said. Clara laughed softly, a sound that made his chest feel light. "I just like to help," she replied, placing the herbs on the table. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the trust, care, and connection they had built over the weeks. After breakfast, they ventured into the forest together. The sun was warm and the air was filled with the scent of fresh pine and earth. Elias showed Clara a hidden path he had discovered long ago, one that led to a small waterfall cascading into a clear pool. Clara gasped at the sight. "It's beautiful," she said, her eyes wide with wonder. Elias smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction. For years he had kept this secret place to himself, but now he wanted to share it, to show her the beauty he had found in isolation. They spent the afternoon near the waterfall. Clara collected wildflowers while Elias examined the rocks and the water. They spoke quietly, sharing thoughts about life, dreams, and the world beyond the mountains. Elias found himself opening up more than ever before. He spoke about his fears, his regrets, and the lessons he had learned in solitude. Clara listened without judgment, her presence steady and reassuring. In her eyes he saw understanding, patience, and the quiet joy of companionship. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the forest, Elias and Clara sat by the edge of the pool. The water reflected the colors of the sky, and the sound of the waterfall filled the air. Elias felt a deep sense of peace, a recognition that the bond they had formed was rare and precious. Clara reached out and took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried a depth of meaning. Elias felt warmth spread through him, a connection that was both comforting and thrilling. Over the following weeks, their bond continued to deepen. Elias taught Clara more about living in the forest, how to track animals, gather wild edibles, and prepare for the changing seasons. Clara, in turn, shared her own knowledge, her curiosity, and her gentle humor. They worked side by side, their movements coordinated by years of developing a mutual understanding. Each day brought new discoveries, small joys, and moments of quiet intimacy that strengthened their relationship. One evening, Elias prepared a special meal for Clara. Using vegetables from the garden and fish from the stream, he crafted a simple but thoughtful dinner. Clara watched him with appreciation, her eyes reflecting gratitude and affection. "You've taught me so much," she said softly. "Not just about the forest, but about patience, care, and life itself." Elias felt a lump in his throat. Her words were sincere, and they spoke to the depth of the connection they had built. For the first time, he realized that he did not just want her presence, he wanted her in his life, fully, permanently. That night, as the fire burned in the cabin, Elias and Clara shared stories of their pasts. Clara spoke of her childhood, the people she had loved, and the experiences that had shaped her. Elias shared more of his own story, including the memories of the woman he had lost. Clara listened with empathy and compassion, never judging, never interrupting. In this exchange, they found trust, understanding, and a sense of emotional closeness that neither had experienced before. The following days were filled with both work and reflection. They repaired the cabin together, cleaned the garden, and explored the forest. Elias noticed that he was no longer preoccupied with the past in the same way. Clara's presence had anchored him in the present, allowing him to enjoy life again. He found himself laughing more, speaking more freely, and appreciating the small moments of connection and care. Clara's companionship had awakened a part of him that he had thought long dead. One afternoon, while walking through the forest, Elias and Clara came across a patch of wild berries. Clara knelt to pick some, and Elias joined her. As they worked, he felt the familiar trembling in his chest, the emotional awareness that had returned with her presence. This time, however, the feeling was not frightening. It was comforting. It reminded him that he could feel, that he could connect, and that life could still offer moments of joy, intimacy, and trust. Later, they returned to the cabin and prepared a simple meal with the berries. Clara laughed as she accidentally spilled some juice on the table, and Elias chuckled, wiping it up with a rag. These small, ordinary moments felt extraordinary to him now. The shared laughter, the gentle teasing, and the simple acts of living together had transformed his perception of life. He realized that happiness could be found in the mundane, in the quiet companionship of someone who truly cared. As the weeks turned into months, Elias and Clara grew even closer. Their days were filled with work, exploration, and shared moments of reflection. They began to plan for the future, discussing how to prepare for the changing seasons and how to make their life in the mountains more comfortable. Elias felt a sense of purpose he had not known in decades. Clara's presence had given him not just companionship, but a reason to continue to care and to invest in life again. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Elias and Clara sat together outside the cabin. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the forest was bathed in a gentle glow. Clara leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Elias felt a deep warmth, a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. For the first time in decades, he felt complete. He had found someone who understood him, who accepted him, and who shared his life fully. That night they prepared for bed together, performing their evening routines with quiet familiarity. As they settled under blankets, Elias felt a profound sense of gratitude. The trembling he had felt months ago, the fear and anticipation of connection had transformed into trust, comfort, and affection. Clara had helped him rediscover the capacity for love, companionship, and emotional openness. In the days that followed, their life together became even more. The summer days were long and golden, and the mountains seemed to hum with life. The forest was dense and full of color. The streams sparkled in the sunlight, and the air was fragrant with the smell of pine and wildflowers. For Elias and Clara, life had settled into a rhythm that was both simple and rich, filled with work, laughter, quiet reflection, and shared moments that neither had expected when their paths first crossed. Mornings began with the sun spilling light through the cabin windows. Elias would gather firewood and tend to the small garden while Clara collected fresh water from the stream or prepared breakfast. They moved through their routine effortlessly, each aware of the other without needing constant conversation. Their shared silence was comfortable, a reflection of the trust and companionship they had built over the past months. One morning, Elias noticed Clara watching him more closely than usual as he chopped wood. She had a small smile, and her eyes held a kind of quiet curiosity. "You make this look easy," she said softly. Elias wiped sweat from his brow and chuckled. "It's nothing," he replied, though he secretly enjoyed her attention. Clara knelt down near the woodpile, arranging smaller branches for kindling. Her movements were careful and deliberate, and Elias felt a familiar warmth in his chest, a mix of admiration, care, and something deeper he had only recently begun to recognize. After breakfast, they ventured into the forest together. Elias had discovered a small grove of wildflowers that he had never shown anyone before. Clara's eyes lit up as they stepped into the clearing. The flowers were a riot of color, delicate and fragile, swaying